Hi, boys and girls. It's Miss Manning here. Today we're going to be learning Module 6, Lesson 5, where we're learning to find the patterns in vertical and horizontal lines and understand that points on the plane are certain distances from the axis. So for us to be successful, we need to really be familiar with these two terms, parallel and perpendicular. And the easiest way to remember parallel is to think of the two L's in parallel. They're traveling in the same direction. So our parallel lines need to be traveling in the same direction so that way, even if I extended them, they would never run into each other. And then perpendicular is this long, difficult word, just like word or lines that run into each other are difficult. So that's just kind of a way for us to remember that they're lines that intersect, and they intersect at a 90-degree angle. So for your problem set, we have a coordinate plane that they've given us, and we have to create lines. So I'm going to do the homework example. And the first thing that I would look at is our x and our y axis, and I would look at how it's labeled. So they haven't labeled these lines, but if I start at my origin and I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I know that they are just spaced one apart. So I could finish labeling, whoops, but you have to know how to count, labeling this x-axis if I needed to, or I could leave it blank depending on what you need. They want you to use a straight edge to create a line that goes through points A and B. Well, obviously, I don't have a straight edge, so I'm going to use the graph that is already there and try to draw the straightest line I can. And we're going to label that G. This is a cursive G. They're going to do all of our lines in a cursive lettering, so that way we can keep a distinction between the points, which are capital letters, and the lines, which are lowercase cursive letters. Now it says that line G is parallel to what axis? Well, here's my x-axis, and here's my y-axis. And remember, parallel, like those two L's, it has to be traveling in the same direction. So it's traveling in the same direction as my x-axis. Perpendicular is difficult, so we think of like crossing it out. So perpendicular is being difficult. It's perpendicular to my y-axis. They want us to draw two more points on our line G, and then we're going to name them C and D. So I can't draw my points out here. It's got to be on this line here. So I'm going to put a line here, or a point here, and label it C, and a point here and label it D. And see how I did those in uppercase letters? Now they want us to give the coordinates of each of those points. So the easiest way for us to do that is to draw that line that extends down. So my x coordinate for A is 4. And then I'm going to draw my line over that extends here. Oh, I didn't label this one. So I'm going to start here where I know 5, 6, 7, 8. Now point B, I'm going to draw down to my x-axis. It's at 9. And oh, look at that. My y-axis is the same of 8. C, I'm going to draw down to 5. Same thing, it's still at the same y-axis point. D, it is 7, and it's going to have the same y-axis. So what do all of the points on line G have in common? Well, I didn't have to keep redoing the y coordinate because they were all in 8. So they have the same y coordinate. And then they want you to give coordinates of another point that falls on line G with an x coordinate greater to 25. So they're wanting you to imagine going off of this coordinate plane that you can see. Imagine it continuing to go. So my x coordinate has to be greater than 25. So we could do 26, or we could do something like 100. It doesn't matter, because if it's going to fall on this line, we know the y coordinate has to be 8. So it could be 26, 8, or it could be 100, 8, whatever you want to do there. Then for problem 2, you're kind of doing the opposite of what we just did. You are going to be plotting yourself. So I'm going to do the homework example. But first, let's take a look at our grid and let's kind of identify. It's split into halves. So it has 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2. But there's a point missing here. There's a line here, but they haven't labeled it. So I have to ask myself, what's between 0 and 1/2? And if you think of 1/2 as 2/4, what's in between 0 and 2/4? That would be 1/4. And that would make this 0, 1/4, 2/4, and this one 3/4. So that's going to make plotting these points easier. So our first one is 3/4, 3. So I'm going to start in my origin, travel over 3/4 and up 3 to this point right here, and I'm supposed to label that point H. Then I have 3/4, 2 and 1/4. So over 3/4, up 2 and 1/4 for I. Then I have 3/4, 1/2. So over 3/4, up 1/2 for J, the best point they have. And then K is over 3/4 and up 1, 1 and 1/4, 1 and 2/4, 1 and 3/4 for K. And then they want us to draw a line to connect those, and we're labeling it F. That's a cursive F. I'm going to do that in blue. Just travel along that graph paper that they have there, the grid, and you're going to label it line F. In line F, X equals blank for all of the values. So if we look at it, I even extended it down further, the X coordinate is all 3/4, or I can see it here on my coordinate plane. Now they want us to circle the correct word. So these are my two words. Line F is parallel or perpendicular to the x-axis. So here's my x-axis. Is it traveling in the same direction? Nope, it's being difficult like the word perpendicular. So we're going to circle perpendicular. Line F is parallel or perpendicular to the y-axis. Here's our y-axis. They're traveling in the same direction like the two L's in parallel. What pattern occurs in the coordinate pairs that makes F vertical? So vertical is it going up and down? So what pattern would make it travel up and down? Well, the pattern that we saw is they all had to have the same X coordinate. If they all had different X coordinates and different Y coordinates, we would end up with a diagonal line. But we had a vertical line. In the last one, we had a horizontal line, and they all had the same Y coordinates. For each pair, they want you to think about the line that joins them. So we're going to be looking at the relationship between our X and our Y coordinates in each one of those, and we're going to circle them if they're parallel to the X-axis. So they have to be traveling the same direction that the X-axis does, which is horizontally. So our first one is 3.2, 7 and 5, 7. So right away I see that this has a y coordinate the same. So if I was doing 3.2, 7 and then 5, 7, they would both be along the same y coordinate, making that line horizontal. So that one would be parallel to the x-axis. Here it's 8 and 8.4 and 8 and 8.8, or I should say 8 and 4/10 and 8 and 8/10. So here they share x coordinates. So if I'm thinking of a coordinate grid and they have x coordinates, it's going to be just like the one that we did, and that was not parallel to the x-axis. So B would not be an option. And then we have C, they're kind of tricking you here. We have 6.5, 12, and 6 2/10, 10. or I'm sorry, comma 11. So what we know 11 and 12 are not equal. What we really have to ask ourselves is 6.5, is that equal to 6 2/10? So the easiest way to do that is to take this 2/10 and make it a fraction. 2/10, we're going to put it over 2, we have 2/10. Is that equal to 6.5? The only way that we can compare these two, like we learned previously, is for us to have common denominators. So I'm going to have to take this fraction times 5/5, which gives me 6 5/10. So is 6 5/10 equal to 6 2/10? No, these are not equal. Therefore, they're not going to be parallel to the x-axis. For your exit ticket, you're going to be creating a line similar to we did in the problem set, giving the coordinates, and then talking about what you noticed about lines and parallel, perpendicular, and things like that. So good luck, guys.